Molière, 1622 to 1673. 1. The French Theatre. It remained for French drama and poetry to bring Europe under their sway. The humor of history arranged that French literature in this age should take to the stage, that the drama, so long outlawed by the Church, should be encouraged by Cardinal Richelieu, that Italian comedy should be imported into France by Cardinal Mazarin, and that Louis XIV should inherit a taste for the theatre from these two ecclesiastics who had prepared or preserved his power. The modern drama had reached literary form in Italy under the highly cultured popes of the Renaissance, and Leo X had attended plays without demanding that they be fit for virgins. But the Reformation and the consequent Council of Trent had put an end to this ecclesiastical lenience. The drama continued to be tolerated in Italy, said Benedict XIV, to avoid greater evils, and in Spain because it served the Church. In France, however, the clergy, shocked by the sexual freedom of the comic stage, condemned the theatre as an enemy to public morals. A long succession of bishops and theologians ruled that actors were excommunicated ipso facto by their very profession. The Paris clergy, through the authoritative voice of Bossuet, refused them the sacraments or burial in consecrated ground unless they repented and renounced their calling. Unable to secure priestly administration of sacramental matrimony, actors had to content themselves with common law marriages of hectic impermanence. French law, too, pronounced actors infamous and excluded them from every honorable employment. Magistrates were forbidden to attend theatrical representations. It is one of the outstanding features of modern history that the theatre overcame this resistance. The popular demand for make-believe to alleviate and avenge reality generated a long supply of farces and comedies, and the pains of monogamy provided an especially paying audience for dramas of licit or illicit love. Richelieu apparently agreed with Leo X that the easiest way to keep the theatre within bounds was to patronize the best rather than condemn all. Thereby he might give a lead to public taste and bread to decent companies. Note Voltaire's report. Since Cardinal Richelieu introduced regular performances of plays at court, which have now made Paris the rival of Athens, not only was there a special bench for the Academy, which included several ecclesiastics among its members, but also one for the bishops. In 1641, presumably at the cardinal's request, Louis XIII took under his protection a group of actors thereafter known as the Troupe Royale, or the Comédiens Royaux, gave them a pension of 1,200 livres per year, issued an edict acknowledging the theatre to be a legitimate form of entertainment, and expressed the royal wish that the calling of an actor should no longer be held prejudicial to his social standing. This troupe established its theatre at the Hôtel de Bourgogne, received the official patronage of Louis XIV, and continued through his reign to excel in the production of tragedies. To raise the standards of French comedy, Mazarin invited Italian players to Paris. One of these was Tiberio Fiorello, whose performance of the boasting buffoon Scaramuccia made him a favorite with Paris and the court. He and his fellows probably shared in giving the theatrical fever to Jean Coquelin IV, and in teaching him the arts of the comic theatre. When Scaramouche returned to Italy in 1659, Jean Coquelin, known to the stage and the world as Molière, became the chief comedian to the king, and soon, in the fond judgment of Boileau, the greatest writer of the reign. 2. Apprenticeship. A building at 96 Rue Saint-Honoré in Paris bears an inscription in letters of gold. This house was built on the site of that where Molière was born January 15, 1622. It was the home of Jean-Baptiste Coquelin III, upholsterer and decorator. His wife, Marie Cressay, had brought him a dowry of 2,200 livres. She gave him 6 children and then died after 10 years of marriage. Jean-Baptiste Coquelin IV, her first child, remembered her only vaguely and never mentioned her in his plays. The father married again in 1633, but as this stepmother died in 1637, it was the father who bore the brunt of his son's genius, directed his education, and thought to mold his career. In 1631, Jean Coquelin III became valet tapissier de chambre du roi, superintendent of the royal upholstery, with the privilege of making the royal bed and of living in the king's household at an annual salary of 300 livres. A modest sum, but only 3 months of attendance were required in any year. The father had bought the office from his brother and planned to transmit it to his son. In 1637, Louis XIII recognized Jean Coquelin IV as rightful heir to the position, and if the father's aspirations had been realized, Molière might have been known to history, if at all, as the man who made the king's bed. However, a grandfather had a liking for the theatre and took the boy with him now and then to the performances. To fit him for making the king's bed, Jean IV was sent to the Jesuit Collège de Clermont, the alma mater of heretics. He learned considerable Latin, read Terence profitably, and doubtless took interest, perhaps part, in the dramas staged by the Jesuits as a device for educating their students in Latin, literature, and speech. According to Voltaire, Jean also received instruction from the philosopher Gassendi, who had been engaged as tutor for a rich classmate. In any case, Jean learned much about Epicurus and translated a considerable portion of Lucretius's Epicurean epic, De Rerum Natura. Some lines in Le Misanthrope are almost a translation of a passage in Lucretius. It is probable that Jean, before ending his youth, had lost his faith. After 5 years at college, Jean studied law. He appears to have practiced briefly in the courts. For some months he followed his father's profession, this in 1642. In that year he met Madeleine Béjart, then a gay lady of 24. 5 years earlier she had been the mistress of the Comte de Modène. He graciously acknowledged the child she bore him and let his son act as godfather at the christening. Jean, now 20, was attracted by her beauty, her cheerful and kindly disposition. In all probability she accepted him as a lover. Her passion for the theatre joined with other factors in deciding him to turn his back upon upholstery, to sign away for 630 livres his right to succeed his father as a valet tapissier to the king, and to plunge into the profession of an actor in 1643. He left his father and went to live in the home of Madeleine Béjart. With her, her 2 brothers, and some others, he entered into a formal contract establishing the Illustre Théâtre, this on June 30th, 1643. The Comédie Française regards that contract as the beginning of its long and distinguished career. As was the custom with actors, Jean now took a stage name and became Molière. The new company hired a tennis court for its theatre, presented a variety of plays, and went bankrupt. In the year 1645, Molière was thrice arrested for debt. His father, hoping that the youth had been cured of stage fever, paid his debts and secured his release. But Molière reorganized the Illustre Théâtre and went off on a tour of the provinces. The Duc d'Épernon, governor of Guyenne, gave the company his support. In a wearing series of successes and failures, the troupe passed from Narbonne to Toulouse, Albi, Carcassonne, Nantes, Agen, Grenoble, Lyon, Montpellier, Bordeaux, Béziers, Dijon, Avignon, Rouen. Molière rose to be manager in 1650, and by 100 expedients kept the company solvent and fed. In 1653, the Prince de Conti, his old schoolfellow, lent his name and support to the players, probably because his secretary admired the actress Mademoiselle Duparc. But in 1655, the prince had a religious stroke and informed the company that his conscience forbade his connection with the theatre. Later, he publicly denounced the stage, and Molière in particular, as a corrupter of youth, an enemy to morality and Christianity. Gradually, amid these vicissitudes, the troupe improved its competence, income, and repertoire. Molière learned the art and tricks of the theatre. By 1655, he was writing as well as acting plays. By 1658, he felt strong enough to challenge the preemption of the Paris stage by the King's players at the Hôtel de Bourgogne, and a private troupe that was operating the Théâtre du Marais. From Rouen, he and Madeleine Béjart came to Paris to prepare the ground. He visited his father and won forgiveness for his sins and his career. He persuaded Philippe I, Duke d'Orléans, to take the company under his protection and to secure for it a hearing at the court. On October 24, 1658, this troupe de Monsieur presented before the king in the guard-room of the Louvre Corneille's tragedy Nicomede. Molière played the main part, not very successfully, for he suffered, Voltaire tells us, from a kind of hiccup which was quite unsuited to serious roles, but which served only to make his acting in comedy the more enjoyable. He saved the day by following the tragedy with a comedy now lost. He acted it with a verve and gaiety, a rising eyebrow and babbling mouth that made the audience wonder why he had ever played tragedy at all. The king was young enough to enjoy the fun and man enough to appreciate Molière's courage. He issued instructions that the troupe de Monsieur should share the Salle du Petit Bourbon with the Italian company of Scaramouche. There, too, the newcomers failed when they attempted tragedies, in which they fell short of the royal players at the Hôtel de Bourgogne, and they succeeded in comedies, above all in those that Molière composed. They continued, nevertheless, to produce tragedies, The leading ladies felt that they shone better in serious drama, and Molière himself was never content to be a comedian. The struggles and absurdities of life had developed in him a vein of melancholy, and he found it tragical to be always comical. Moreover, he had tired of the comedies of amorous intrigue, of the old stock characters and whipping boys, mostly echoes of Italy. Looking about him in Paris, he saw things that seemed to him quite as laughable as Polichinelle and Scaramouche. "No longer need I take Plautus and Terence for my masters, or despoil Menander," he was quoted as saying. "I have only to study the world." 3. Molière and the Ladies. There was, for example, the Hôtel du Rambouillet, where men and women were making a fetish of delicate manners and perfumed speech. Molière wrote Les Précieuses Ridicules. Its production, on November 18, 1659, began the French comedy of manners and Molière's fortune and fame. The laughable Exquisites was brief enough to be absorbed in an hour and sharp enough to leave a lasting sting. Two cousins, Magdelon and Catos, enveloped in 7 veils of refinement, protest against their matter-of-fact, short of Frank's elders' anxiety to have them marry. Gorgibus. What see you in them to find fault with? Magdelon. Fine gallantry of theirs indeed. What, to begin immediately with matrimony? Were the whole world like you, romance would be ended at once. Matrimony should never be brought about till after other adventures. A lover, to be agreeable, must understand how to utter fine sentiments, to sigh forth the soft, the tender, the passionate, and his address must be according to the rules. In the first place, he should behold, either at church or in the park, or at some public ceremony, the person of whom he becomes enamored, or else he should be fatally introduced to her by a relation or friend, and go from her melancholy and pensive. He conceals his passion for some time from the beloved object, but pays her several visits, at which some discourse about gallantry never fails to be brought upon the carpet to exercise the wits of all the company. The day comes for him to declare himself, which usually should be done in the walk of some garden, while the company is at a distance. This declaration is met by immediate resentment, which appears by our coloring, and which for a while banishes the lover from our presence. He finds afterwards the way to pacify us, to accustom us insensibly to hear his passion, and to draw from us that confession which causes so much trouble. Then follow the adventures, the rivals that thwart an established inclination, the persecutions of fathers, the jealousies arising from false appearances, the complainings, the despair, the running off with, and its consequences. Thus are things carried on in a handsome manner, and these are the rules that cannot be dispensed with in a genteel piece of gallantry. But to come point-blank to the conjugal union, to make no love but by the marriage contract, and to take a romance by the tail, once more, dear father, nothing can be more mechanic than such a proceeding, and I'm sick at heart with merely the idea that it gives me. Catos. For myself, uncle, all I can say is that I think matrimony a mighty shocking thing. How can one endure the thought of lying by a man that's really naked? 2 valets borrow their master's raiment, disguise themselves as a marquis and a general, and court the 2 ladies with all the paraphernalia of gallantry and persiflage. Their masters break in upon them, tear off their plumage, and leave the young women faced with the almost naked truth. As in most of Molière's comedies of sex, there are some rough passages and some horseplay, but so keen a satire of social follies that the effect became an event in the history of manners. An uncertain tradition credits a woman with rising amid the audience and crying out, "Courage, courage! Molière, this is a good comedy." One habitué of Madame de Rambouillet's salon, emerging from the performance, was reported to have said, "Yesterday we admired all the absurdities which have been so delicately and sensibly criticized, but in the words of Saint-Remy to Clovis, we must now burn what we have adored and adore what we have burned." The Marquise de Rambouillet met the attack with genius by arranging with Molière to give a special performance of the play for the benefit of her salon. He repaid her courtesy with a preface in which he claimed to have satirized not her circle, but its imitators. In any case, the reign of the Précieuses ended. Boileau, in his 10th satire, referred to those beaux esprits yesterday so renowned whom Molière has deflated with one blow of his art. The play succeeded so well that the price of admission was doubled after the premiere. In its first year it was performed 44 times. The king commanded 3 performances for the court, attended all 3, and gave the company 3,000 livres. By February of 1660, the grateful company had paid the author 999 livres in royalties. But he had made a mistake by inserting into the play a satirical reference to the actors of the Théâtre Royal. None but they are capable of gaining things a reputation. The rest are ignorant creatures who speak their parts just as one talks. These don't understand how to make the verses roar or to pause at a beautiful passage. How can it be known where the fine lines are if the actor does not stop at them and apprise you thereby to applaud? The troupe at the Hôtel de Bourgogne expressed open contempt of Molière as unable to produce tragedy, and as capable only of coarse comedy. Molière strengthened their case by writing and presenting a middling farce, Le Cuckold Imaginaire, the imaginary cuckold, though the king was pleased to see this 9 times. Meanwhile, the old Louvre was undergoing alterations. The Salle du Petit Bourbon was incontinently demolished, and for a time it seemed that Molière's troupe de monsieur would be stageless. The king, always friendly, came to his rescue by assigning to him in the Palais Royal the salle in which Richelieu had had plays performed. There, as an almost physical part of the court, Molière's company remained till his death. His first production in this new home was his last attempt at tragedy, Don Garcia. He thought with some reason that the pompous rhetorical style of tragedy as developed by Corneille and played at the Hôtel de Bourgogne was unnatural. He aspired to a simpler and more natural style. Had the classic dominance and his hiccup allowed him, he might have produced successful combinations of tragedy with comedy, as in Shakespeare. And indeed his greatest comedies have a touch of tragedy. But Don Garcia failed, despite the efforts of the king to buttress it by attending 3 performances. Molière was designed to suffer tragedy, not to play it. So he returned to comedy. L'École des Maris, the School for Husbands, had a solacing success, playing daily from June 24th to September 11th, 1661. It foreshadowed the marriage of Molière, then 39, with Armande Béjart, then 18. Its problem was, how should a young woman be trained to be a good and faithful wife? The brothers Ariste and Sganarelle are fortunate in being the guardians of the girls they plan to marry. Ariste, who is 60, treats his 18-year-old ward, Leonore, quite leniently. I've not made crimes of little liberties. I've continually complied with her youthful desires, and thank heaven I don't repent it. I've given her leave to see good company, diversions, plays, and balls. These are things which, for my part, I always judge very proper to form the minds of young people. And the world is a school which, in my opinion, teaches the way of living better than any book. She likes to spend money on clothes, linen, and new fashions. I try to gratify her wishes. These are pleasures we should allow young women when our circumstances can afford it. Sganarelle, the younger brother, derides Ariste as a fool seduced by the latest fancies. He laments the passing of the old morality, the looseness of the new, the insolence of liberated youth. He proposes a stern discipline to train his ward, Isabelle, to be an obedient wife. She shall be dressed in becoming clothes. Staying at home like a discreet person, she shall apply herself entirely to affairs of housewifery, darning linen in her leisure hours, or knitting stockings for her diversion. She shall not stir abroad without someone to watch her. I will not wear horns if I can help it. After an incredible intrigue, imitated from a Spanish comedy, Isabelle runs away with an ingenious lover, while Leonore marries Ariste and remains faithful to him to the end of the play. Molière was evidently debating with himself. On February 20th, 1662, now 40, he married a woman less than half his age. Moreover, Armande Béjart was the daughter of Madeleine Béjart, with whom Molière had cohabited 20 years before. His enemies accused him of marrying his own illegitimate daughter. Montfleury, leader of the rival troupe at the Hôtel de Bourgogne, wrote to Louis XIV to this effect in 1663. Louis replied by standing godfather to Molière's first child by Armande. Madeleine, when Molière met her, had been too lavish of her person to give us any certainty of Armande's parentage. Molière apparently did not think himself her father, and we may allow that he was slightly better informed on the point than we can be. Armande had grown up as the spoiled pet of the troupe. Molière had seen her almost every day. He had loved her as a child long before he had known her as a woman. She was by this time an accomplished actress. With such a background she was not made for monogamy, least of all with a man who had outworn the spirit of youth. She loved the pleasures of life and indulged in flirtations that were widely interpreted as infidelities. Molière suffered, his friends and foes gossiped. 10 months after his marriage he tried to salve his wounds by criticizing male jealousy and defending female emancipation. He tried to be Ariste, but Armande could not be Leonore. Perhaps he failed to be Ariste, for he was as impatient as any theatrical producer. In the Impromptu of Versailles, in October 1663, he described himself as saying to his wife, "Hold your peace, wife, you are an ass." whereto she replies, "Thank you, good husband. See how it is? Matrimony alters people strangely. You would not have said this a year and a half ago." He continued his meditations on jealousy and liberty in L'École des Femmes, which had its premiere on December 26, 1662. Almost the opening lines struck the theme of cuckoldry. Arnulf, played by Molière, is again the old-fashioned tyrant who believes that a woman loosed is a loose woman, and that the only means of guaranteeing a wife's fidelity is to train her to modest servitude, keep her under strict watch, and skimp her education. Agnès, his ward and prospective bride, grows up in such delectable innocence that she asks Arnulf, in a line that echoed through France, "Si les enfants faisoient par l'oreille," if children are begotten through the ear. As Arnulf has told her nothing about love, she accepts with guileless pleasure the attentions of Horace, who finds his way to her during her guardian's brief absence. When Arnulf returns, she gives him an objective account of Horace's procedure. Arnulf: "Well, but what did he do when he was alone with you?" Agnès: "He said he loved me with an unequalled passion, and told me in the finest language in the world things that nothing can ever come up to, the agreeableness whereof delighted me every time I heard him speak, and raised within me a certain, I know not what, emotion, which entirely charmed me." Arnulf, aside: "O tormenting inquiry into a fatal secret where the inquirer only suffers all the pain." Aloud: "Besides all this talk, all these pretty ways, didn't he bestow some kisses on you, too?" Agnès: "Oh, to that degree. He took my hands and arms and was never weary of kissing 'em." Arnulf: "Did he take nothing else from you, Agnès?" Seeing her at a loss: "Huh?" Agnès: "Why, he did." Arnulf: "What?" Agnès: "Take." Arnulf: "How?" Agnès: "The—" Arnulf: "What do you mean?" Agnès: "I durst not tell you, for maybe you'll be angry with me." Arnulf: "No." Agnès: "Yes, but you will." Arnulf: "Lack-a-day, I won't." Agnès: "Swear faith, then." Arnulf: "Well, faith." Agnès: "He took— You'll be in a passion." Arnulf: "No." Agnès: "Yes." Arnulf: "No, no, no, no. What the deuce is this mystery? What did he take from you?" Agnès: "He—" Arnulf, aside: "I suffer damnation." Agnès: "He took away the ribbon you gave me. To tell you the truth, I could not help it." Arnulf, recovering himself: "Oh, no matter for the ribbon, but I want to know whether he did nothing but kiss your hands." Agnès: "Why, do people do other things?" Arnulf: "No, no. But in short I must tell you that to accept caskets and hearken to the idle stories of these powdered fops, to permit him in a languishing way to kiss your hands and charm your heart in this manner, is a mortal sin, the greatest that can be committed." Agnès: "A sin, you say? The reason, pray?" Arnulf: "The reason? Why, the reason is because it's declared that heaven is offended at such doings." Agnès: "Offended? But wherefore should it be offended? Lack-a-day, 'tis so sweet, so pleasant. I admire at the delight one finds in it, and didn't know these things before." Arnulf: "Aye, there's a great deal of pleasure in all these tendernesses, these complacent discourses, these fond embraces, but they should be tasted in an honest manner, and the sin should be taken away by marrying." Agnès: "Is it no more a sin when a body's married?" Arnulf: "No." Agnès: "Then marry me out of hand, I pray." Of course Agnès soon runs off to Horace. Arnulf recaptures her and is about to beat her when her sweet voice and form unnerve him, and perhaps when Molière wrote Arnulf's lines he was thinking of Armand. "That speech and that look disarm my fury, and produce a return of tenderness which effaces all her guilt. How strange it is to be in love, and that men should be subject to such weakness for these traitresses. Everybody knows their imperfection, they're nothing but extravagance and indiscretion. Their mind is wicked and their understanding weak. Nothing is more frail, nothing more unsteady, nothing more false, and yet for all that one does everything in the world for the sake of these animals." In the end she eludes him and marries Horace, and Arnulf's friend, Chrysalde, consoles him with the thought that abstention from marriage is the only sure way of avoiding the growth of horns. The play delighted the audience. It was performed 31 times in its first 10 weeks, and the king was young enough to enjoy its laxity. But the more conservative elements at the court condemned the comedy as immoral. Procreation through the ear proved unpopular with the ladies. The Prince de Conti denounced as the most scandalous thing ever staged the second-act scene between Arnulf and Agnès, quoted above. Bossuet anathematized the entire play. Some magistrates called for its suppression as a threat to morality and religion. The rival troupe laughed at the vulgarities of the dialogue, the contradictions in characterization, and the hasty incredibilities of the plot. For a time the play made the conversation of every house in Paris. Molière was too much of a fighter to let these criticisms go unnoticed. In a one-act piece presented at the Palais Royal, June 1, 1663, La Critique de l'École des Femmes, he pictured a gathering of his critics, allowed them to voice their objections forcefully, and made hardly any answer except to let the critique weaken itself through exaggeration and be voiced by ridiculous characters. The Hôtel de Bourgogne kept up this guerre comique by producing a skit called The Counter-Critic, and Molière satirized the royal troupe in L'Impromptu de Versailles on October 18, 1663. The king stood loyally by Molière, invited him to dinner, and now gave him an annual pension of 1,000 livres, not as comédien, but as excellent poète. Time also gave the victory to Molière, and today L'École des Femmes is rated as the first great comedy of the French theatre. 4. L'Affaire Tartuffe. Molière paid a price for the king's favor. Louis so liked his wit and courage that he made him a leading organizer of the entertainments at Versailles and Saint-Germain. One such fete, Les Plaisirs de l'Île Enchantée, filled a week, from May 7th to the 13th, 1664, with jousts, feasting, music, ballet, dancing, and drama, all presented in the park and palace of Versailles under illumination by torches and chandeliers holding 4,000 candles. Molière received 6,000 livres for his labors on this festival. Some scholars have mourned that the king used so much of Molière's genius to provide light-hearted entertainment at the court, and they have imagined the masterpieces that might have matured if the poet and the comedian had had more time to think and write. But he was under pressure from his company, too, and in any case his cares and responsibilities as manager and actor would have kept him from any ivory tower. Many an author writes better under pressure than at leisure. Leisure relaxes the mind, urgency stimulates it. Molière's greatest play was first produced on May 12, 1664, during the height and as part of the Plaisirs de l'Île Enchantée. Tartuffe, in this premiere, hardly fitted the festival, for it was a merciless exposure of hypocrisy taking a pious and moralistic dress. A religious fraternity of laymen, the Compagnie du Saint-Sacrement, later known as the Cabal des Devots, had already pledged its members to work for the suppression of the play. The king, whose liaison with La Vallière had aroused much criticism from the devout, was in a mood to agree with Molière. But having seen the comedy in its private performance at Versailles, he withheld permission to present it to the public of Paris in the Palais Royal. He solaced Molière by inviting him to read Tartuffe at Fontainebleau to a select group, including a papal legate, who raised no objection known to history. This on July 21, 1664. In that month, the drama was performed in the home of the Duke and Duchess, Henrietta Anne, of Orléans, in the presence of the Queen Mother, and the King. The way was being prepared for a public presentation when, in August, Pierre Roulet, vicar of Saint-Barthélemy, published a tribute to the king for prohibiting the play, and took occasion to denounce Molière as a man, or rather a demon in flesh and habited as a man, the most notably impious creature and libertine who ever lived. For writing Tartuffe, to the derision of the whole church, said Père Roulet, Molière should be burned at the stake as a foretaste of the fires of hell. The king rebuked Roulet, but continued to withhold permission for a public performance of Tartuffe. To show where he stood, the king raised Molière's annual pension to 6,000 livres, and took over from Monsieur the protection of Molière's company. Henceforth it was the Troupe du Roi. The controversy simmered for 2 years. Then Molière read to Louis a revised version of the play, with some added lines pointing out that the satire was not of honest faith, but only of hypocrisy. Madame Henrietta supported the author's plea for permission to produce. Louis gave a verbal consent, and while he went off to war in Flanders, the first public presentation of Tartuffe was staged at the Palais Royal on August 5, 1667, 3 years after its court premiere. The next morning, the President of the Parliament of Paris, who belonged to the Company of the Blessed Sacrament, ordered the theatre closed and all its posters torn down. On August 11th, the Archbishop of Paris forbade, on pain of excommunication, the reading, hearing, or performance of the comedy in public or in private. Molière announced that if this triumph of Les Tartuffes continued, he would retire from the stage. The king, returning to Paris, bade the angry dramatist be patient. Molière managed it and was rewarded at last by the removal of the royal prohibition. On February 5, 1669, the play began a successful run of 28 consecutive performances. At the public premiere, the crowd seeking admission was so large and eager that many persons came near to suffocation. It was the drame célèbre of Molière's career. Of all French classic dramas, it has received the greatest number of performances, 2,657 to 1960 at the Comédie Française alone. How far do the contents of the play explain its long postponement and its continuing popularity? They explain the first by their frontal attack upon hypocritical piety. They explain the second by the power and brilliance of their satire. Everything in that satire is, of course, exaggerated. Hypocrisy is rarely so reckless and complete as in Tartuffe. Stupidity is seldom so extravagant as in Orgon, and no maid is so successfully insolent as Durant. The denouement is incredible, as almost always in Molière. This did not trouble him. After he had presented his picture and indictment of hypocrisy, any deus or rex ex machina would do to untangle the plot into triumphant virtue and punished vice. Quite likely the satire was aimed at the Compagnie du Saint-Sacrement, whose members, even if laymen, undertook to direct consciences, to report private sins to public authorities, and to interfere in families to promote religious loyalty and devotion. The play twice referred to a cabal, evidently alluding to the Cabal des Dévots. Soon after the play's public premiere, the Company of the Blessed Sacrament was dissolved. Orgon, the rich bourgeois, first sees Tartuffe in church and is impressed. "Ah, had you but seen him, you would have loved him as well as I do. He came every day to church with a composed mien and knelt just near me. He attracted the eyes of the whole congregation by the fervency with which he sent up his prayers to heaven. He sighed and groaned very heavily, and at every moment he humbly kissed the earth. And when I was going out, he would advance before me to offer me holy water at the door. Understanding his lowly condition, I made him presents, but he always modestly would offer to return me part. At length heaven moved me to take him home, since which everything seems to prosper. I see he reproves without distinction, and that even with regard to my wife he is extremely cautious of my honor. He acquaints me who ogles her." But Tartuffe does not similarly impress Orgon's wife and children. His hearty appetite, his love for tidbits, his round paunch and rubicund face dull for them the point of his homilies. Orgon's brother-in-law, Cléant, begs him to see the difference between hypocrisy and religion. "As I see no character in life greater or more valuable than to be truly devout, nor anything nobler or fairer than the fervor of a sincere piety, so I think nothing more abominable than the outside daubing of a pretended zeal, than those mountebanks, those devotees in show, who make a trade of godliness, and who would purchase honors and reputation with a hypocritical turning up of the eyes and affected transports." Orgon, however, continues to take Tartuffe at phrase value, submits to his guidance, invokes God's aid upon him when he belches, and proposes to give him in marriage his daughter Marianne, who violently prefers Valère. The real heroine of the piece is Marianne's maid Dorine, who, as in classic comedy, seems to prove that Providence has distributed genius in inverse ratio to money. Delightful is her reception of Tartuffe's first entry upon the stage. Tartuffe, seeing Dorine, speaks aloud to his servants. "Laurence, lock up my haircloth and scourge, and beg of heaven ever to enlighten you with grace. If anybody comes to see me, I am gone to the prisons to distribute my alms." Dorine, aside, "What affectation and roguery!" Tartuffe, "What do you want?" Dorine, "To tell you." Tartuffe, drawing a handkerchief out of his pocket, "Oh, lackaday, pray take me this handkerchief before you speak." Dorine, "What for?" Tartuffe, "Cover that bosom which I can't bear to see. Such objects hurt the soul and usher in sinful thoughts." Dorine, "You mightily melt, then, at a temptation, and the flesh makes a great impression upon your senses. Truly, I can't tell what heat may inflame you, but for my part I'm not so apt to hanker. Now I could see you stark naked from head to foot, and that whole hide of yours not tempt me at all." The next scene is the core of the comedy. Tartuffe tries to make love to Orgon's wife, Elmire, and uses pious language in his plea. His treachery is reported to Orgon, who refuses to believe it, and to show his trust in Tartuffe, he gives over to him all his property. Tartuffe resigns himself to accept it, saying, "Heaven's will be done in all things." The situation is dissolved by Elmire, who, having hidden her husband under a table, sends for Tartuffe, gives him a little encouragement, and soon lures him into attempts at amorous exploration. She pretends compliance, but professes scruples of conscience, which Tartuffe handles with expert casuistry. Evidently Molière had read and relished Pascal's provincial letters. Tartuffe. If nothing but heaven obstructs my wishes, 'tis a trifle with me to remove such an obstacle. Heaven, 'tis true, forbids certain gratifications, but there are ways of compounding those matters. It is a science to stretch the strings of conscience according to the different exigencies of the case, and to rectify the immorality of the action by the purity of our intention. Orgon comes out from his hiding, and angrily bids Tartuffe leave the house, but Tartuffe explains to him that the house, by Orgon's recently signed deed, belongs to Tartuffe. Molière, not very ingeniously, cuts this knot by having the king's agents opportunely discover that Tartuffe is a long-sought-for criminal. Orgon recovers his property, Valère gets Marianne, and the play concludes with a melodious paean to the justice and benevolence of the king. 5. The Amorous Atheist. The royal benevolence must have been strained by the next audacity of Molière. At the height of the war over Tartuffe, and while the Dévots were still in triumph over the suppressing of the play, he staged at the Palais Royal, on February 15, 1665, Le Festin de Pierre, the Feast of the Stone Statue, telling in rollicking prose the already oft-told tale of Don Juan, and turning that reckless Casanova into an arrogant atheist. Taking the shell of the story from Tirso de Molina and others, Molière filled it with a remarkable study of a man who enjoys wickedness for its own sake and as a challenge to God. The play is an astonishing echo of the great debate that was embroiling religion with philosophy. Don Juan Tenorio is a marquis and acknowledges obligations to his caste. Otherwise he proposes to enjoy any pleasure he has an itch for. His valet, Sganarelle, calculates at 1,003 the number of women whom his master has seduced and deserted. "Constancy," says Juan, "is only fit for fools. I can't refuse my heart to any lovely creature I see." Such an ethic craves a corresponding theology, so Juan, for his own comfort, is an atheist. His servant tries to reason with him. Sganarelle. "Is it possible that you don't believe in heaven?" Juan. "Forget it." Sganarelle. "That is, you don't." "And hell?" Juan. "Yeah." Sganarelle. "Likewise. And the devil, if you please?" Juan. Yes. Sganarelle. "Again, very little. Don't you believe at all in another life?" Juan. Sganarelle. "Here's a man I'll be hard put to convert. But tell me, surely you believe in le moine bourru?" Literally, the surly monk, a pretended ghost used by nurses and mothers to frighten children. Juan. "Oh, plague on the fool." Sganarelle. "Now that I can't suffer, for there's nothing better established than this moine bourru, and I'll be hanged if he isn't real. But a man must believe something. What do you believe?" Juan. "I believe that 2 and 2 are 4, and that 4 and 4 are 8. Sganarelle. "A lovely creed and beautiful articles of faith. Your religion, then, so far as I can see, is arithmetic? As for me, sir, I understand full well that this world is not a mushroom that grew in a single night. I would like to ask you who made these trees, these rocks, this earth, and that sky up there. Was all this built by itself? Look at yourself, for example. Here you are. Did you make yourself, or wasn't it necessary that your father should enlarge your mother to make you? Can you behold all the inventions of which the human machine is composed without admiring how one part sets another working? Whatever you may say, there is something marvelous in man which all the pundits will never explain. Isn't it wonderful to see me here, and that I have in my head something that thinks 100 different things in a moment and makes my body do what I wish? I want to clap my hands, raise my arm, lift my eyes just to the sky, lower my head, move my feet, go to the right, to the left, forward, to the rear, turn. He falls while turning. Juan. Good. Your argument has a broken nose. In the next scene, the tilt between Juan and religion takes another form. He meets a beggar who tells him that he prays every day for those who give him alms. "Surely," says Juan, "a man who prays every day must be very well off." "On the contrary," answers the beggar, "most often I have not even a piece of bread." Juan offers him a louis d'or if he will swear an oath. The beggar refuses. "I'd rather die of hunger." Juan is a bit startled by this fortitude. He hands over the coin, as he says, for love of humanity. All the opera-going world knows the denouement. Juan comes upon a statue of the commander whose daughter he had seduced and whose life he had taken. The statue invites Juan to dinner. Juan comes, gives him his hand, and is led into hell. The infernal apparatus of the medieval stage appears. Thunder and lightning fall with great noise upon Don Juan. The earth opens and swallows him. A vast fire rises from the spot where he has fallen. The first night's audience was shocked by Molière's exposition of Juan's unbelief. It may have allowed that he had exposed Juan's worthless character as well as his lack of theology, that the Don had been revealed as a brute without conscience or tenderness, spreading deception and grief wherever he went, and it may have observed that the villain's victims were presented with all the author's sympathy. But it noted that the answer to atheism had been put into the mouth of a fool who believed in bogies more firmly than in God, and it was not mollified by Juan's final damnation, for it saw him descending into hell without a word of repentance or fear. After the premiere, Molière toned down the most offensive passages, but public opinion was not appeased. On April 18, 1665, Sieur de Rochemont, avocat en parlement, published Observations sur une comédie de Molière, in which he described Le Festin de Pierre as truly devilish. Nothing more impious has ever appeared, even in pagan times, and the king was exhorted to suppress the play. While this noble prince devotes all his care to maintain religion, Molière is working to destroy it. There is no man so little enlightened in the doctrine of the faith who, having seen this play, can affirm that Molière, so long as he persists in presenting it, is worthy to participate in the sacraments or to be received into penitence without a public reparation. Louis continued his favor to Molière. The Festin de Pierre ran 3 days a week from February 15th to Palm Sunday, when it was withdrawn. It did not return to the boards till 4 years after the dramatist's death, and then only in a verse adaptation by Thomas Corneille, who omitted the scandalous scene quoted above. The original version disappeared. It was rediscovered in 1813 in a pirated edition that had been published in Amsterdam in 1683. Till 1841, the Corneille version alone held the stage, and in some editions of Molière's works it still replaces the original. 4. Meridian. Not content with the enemies that he had made, Molière proceeded to attack the medical profession. He had pictured Don Juan as being impious in medicine and rating medicine one of the greatest errors of mankind. He had discovered in person the deficiencies and pretenses of 17th-century physicians. He thought that doctors had killed his son by prescribing antimony, and he saw that they were helpless against his own advancing tuberculosis. The king, too, was rebelling against weekly purges and bleedings. According to Molière, it was Louis who prompted him to put the doctors on the grill. So, borrowing from old comedies on this ancient theme, he wrote in 5 days L'Amour Médecin. It was produced at Versailles on September 15, 1665, before the king, who was heartily amused, and it met with an hilarious reception when it was staged a week later at the Palais Royal. A woman is ill, 4 doctors are called in. They enter into private consultation, but discuss only their own affairs. When the father insists upon a decision and a remedy, one prescribes an enema, another swears that an enema will kill the patient. She gets better without medicine, which infuriates the doctors. "It is better to die according to the rules," cries Dr. Baillis, "than to recover contrary to them." On August 6, 1666, Molière presented another short piece, Le Médecin malgré lui, as a merry prelude to La Misanthrope, designed to offset the gloom of that paean to pessimism. It does not repay reading today. Molière hardly intended these satires on medicine to be taken seriously. We note that he kept on excellent terms with his own physician, Monsieur de Mauvillain, and that he interceded with the king to get a sinecure for the doctor's son in 1669. He once explained how it was that he and Mauvillain got along so well. "We reason with one another. He prescribes remedies, I omit to take them, and I recover." Still amid the battle over Tartuffe, Molière presented, on June 4, 1666, another satire hardly calculated to please either the public or the court. If action is the soul of drama, Le Misanthrope is rather a philosophical dialogue than a play. One sentence can tell the story. Alceste, who demands a strict morality and complete honesty from himself and all, loves Célimène, who favors him but relishes a multiplicity of suitors and compliments. To Molière, this is but a scaffolding for a study of morality. Should we always speak the truth, or should we substitute courtesy for truth in order to get along in the world? Alceste resents the compromises that society makes with the truth. He condemns the hypocrisy of the court, where everyone pretends to the loftiest sentiments and the warmest regards, while at heart each one is scheming for himself, is critical of all the rest, and uses flattery as a lever to position or power. Alceste scorns all this and proposes to be honest even to the point of suicide. Durant, a scribbling courtier, insists on reading his verses to Alceste and asks for sincere criticism. He gets it and vows revenge. Célimène flirts, Alceste reproves her, she calls him a prig. We almost hear Molière rebuking his gay wife, and indeed it was he who played Alceste and she Célimène. Alceste. Madam, will you have me be plain with you? I'm very much dissatisfied with your ways of behavior. I don't quarrel with you, but your disposition, madam, opens to the first comer too ready an access to your heart. You have too many lovers whom we see besieging you, and my soul cannot reconcile itself to this. Célimène. Do you blame me for attracting lovers? Can I help it if people find me lovable? And when they make delectable efforts to see me, should I take a stick and drive them out? Alceste. No, it is not a stick that you must use, but a spirit less yielding and melting before their vows. I know that your beauty follows you everywhere, but your welcome holds further those whom your eyes attract. And your sweetness to all who surrender to you completes in their hearts the work of your charms. The philosophical foil to Alceste is his friend Philante, who advises him to adjust himself amiably to the natural defects of mankind, and to recognize politeness as the lubrication of life. The zest of the play lies in Molière's division of his sentiments between Alceste and Philante. Alceste is Molière the husband who fears that he is a cuckold, and the valet tapissier du roi who, to make the king's bed, has to run the gauntlet of 100 nobles as proud of their pedigree as he is of his genius. Philante is Molière the philosopher, bidding himself to be reasonable and lenient in judging humanity. Says Philante Molière to Molière Alceste, in a passage which we may take as a sample of Molière the poet, My God, let us give ourselves less trouble about the manners of the age, and make some small allowances to human nature. Let us not examine it with so great rigor, but look upon its defects with some indulgence. This world requires a tractable virtue. One may be blameworthy by stress of wisdom. Right reason avoids every extremity, and would have us be wise with sobriety. That great stiffness in the virtues of ancient times too much shocks our age and common usage. It would have mortals too perfect. We must yield to the times without obstinacy, and 'tis an extremity of folly to busy ourselves in correcting the world. I observe, as you do, 1,000 things every day, which might go better taking another course, but whatever I may discover in every transaction, people don't see me in a rage like you. I take men with great calmness, just as they are. I accustom myself to bear with what they do, and I think that at court as well as in the city my phlegm is as much a philosopher as your bile. Napoleon thought that Philante had the better of the argument. Jean-Jacques Rousseau thought Philante a liar and approved Alceste's rigorous morality. In the end, Alceste, like Jean-Jacques, renounces the world and retires to a sterilized solitude. The play had only a moderate success. The courtiers did not relish the satire of their fine manners, and the pit could hardly enthuse over an Alceste who frankly despised everybody but himself. The critics, however, being neither of the pit nor of the court, applauded the play as a brave attempt to write a drama of ideas, and later pundits judge it the most perfect of Molière's works. In the course of time, when its pilloried generation was dead, it won public acceptance. Between 1680 and 1954, it had 1,571 performances at the Comédie Française, only less than Tartuffe and Lavare. Unable to live in peace with the young wife to whom monogamy and beauty seemed a contradiction in terms, Molière left her in August 1667 and went to live with his friend Chapelain at Auteuil in the western end of Paris. Chapelain gently derided him for taking love so seriously, but Molière was more poet than philosopher, and, if we may believe one poet reporting another, confessed, "I have determined to live with her as if she were not my wife, but if you knew what I suffer you would pity me. My passion has reached such a point that it even enters with compassion into all her interests. When I consider how impossible it is for me to conquer what I feel for her, I tell myself that she may have the same difficulty in conquering her inclination to be coquettish, and I find myself more disposed to pity her than to blame her. You will tell me, no doubt, that a man must be a poet to feel this, but for my part I feel that there is but one kind of love, and that those who have not felt these delicacies of sentiment have never truly loved. All things in the world are connected with her in my heart. When I see her, an emotion, transports that may be felt but not described, take from me all power of reflection. I have no longer any eyes for her defects. I can see only all that she has that is lovable. Is not that the last degree of madness? He tried to forget her by losing himself in his work. In 1667 he busied himself arranging entertainment for the king at Saint-Germain. His comedy Amphitryon, presented on January 13, 1668, celebrated again the amours of Jupiter, who seduces Amphitryon's wife Alcmene. When Jupiter explains to her that for a lady to share her bed with Jove is not at all dishonorable, the lines were interpreted by many auditors as condoning the royal liaison with Madame de Montespan. If so, it was a very generous sycophancy, for Molière was in no mood to sympathize with seducers. Like everybody else, he buttered the king with flattery, as at the end of Tartuffe. In another comedy, produced before the court on July 15th, Georges Dandin, ou Le Mari Confondu, we have again the story of the husband confounded, suspecting his wife of adultery, unable to prove it, and eating his heart out with suspicion and jealousy. Molière was pouring salt into his wounds. It was a busy year, for only a few months later, on September 9th, he produced one of his most famous plays, L'Avare, or The Miser. This took its theme and part of its plot from Plautus's Aulularia, but Plautus had taken that from the new comedy of the Greeks. The Miser and satire of him are probably as old as money. No one has ever handled the subject with more vivacity and power than Molière. Harpagon so loves his hoard that he lets his horses starve and go without hoofs. He has such an aversion to giving that he does not give you good day, but prête le bonjour, lends you good day. Seeing 2 candles lit for dinner, he blows one out. He refuses a dowry to his daughter and trusts that his children will predecease him. The satire, as usual in Molière, verges on caricature. The audience found the picture distasteful, and after 8 performances the play was withdrawn. But Boileau's praise helped to revive it. It was shown 47 times in its first 4 years, and is second only to Tartuffe in frequency of presentation. Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme had less merit and more success. In December 1669, a Turkish ambassador came to France. The court put on all its splendor to impress him. He responded with haughty stolidity. After his departure, Louis invited Molière and Lully to compose a comedy ballet in which the ambassador would be parodied as a Turquerie. Molière enlarged the scheme into a satire on the increasing number of middle-class Frenchmen who were struggling to dress and speak like born aristocrats. The comedy had its premiere before king and court at Chambord, October 14th, 1670. When presented at the Palais Royal in November, it atoned financially for the losses of L'Avare. Molière played Monsieur Jourdain. Lully played the Mufti. To invest himself with nobility, Monsieur Jourdain hires a music master, a dancing master, a fencing master, a philosophy master. They come to blows over the relative importance of their arts, whether it is more vital to achieve harmony, to be in step, to be able to kill neatly, or to speak elegant French. In the claims of the music master, we suspect a sly dig at pompous climbing Lully. Half the world knows the scene in which Monsieur Jourdain learns that all language is either prose or verse. Monsieur Jourdain: What? When I say, Nicole, bring me my slippers and give me my night bonnet, this is prose? Philosophy master: Yes, monsieur. Monsieur Jourdain: By my faith, for over 40 years I've been speaking prose without knowing anything about it. I am for all the world most obliged to you for informing me of this. Some courtiers who had not long since graduated from commerce into lace felt that the satire was aimed at them, and they pooh-poohed the play as nonsense. But the king assured Molière, "You have never written anything yet which has amused me so much." Hearing this, says Guizot, the court was at once seized with a fit of admiration. Molière and Lully collaborated again to produce before the court, in January 1671, a tragedy ballet, Psyché. to which Pierre Corneille and Quinault contributed most of the verse. Lully was winning the battle against Molière. Comedy was giving way to opera, dialogue to machinery. Gods and goddesses had to be lowered from heaven or hoisted from hell. The stage at the Palais Royal had to be rebuilt for Psyché at a cost of 1,980 livres, but the production was a financial success. Romance, however, was not Molière's forte. He was more at home when roasting the absurdities of the age on the point of his wit. It seemed to him that a learned woman was an uncomfortable anomaly and an impediment to marriage. He had heard such women pruning vocabularies, debating niceties of grammar, quoting the classics, and talking philosophy. This, to Molière's ears, sounded like a sexual perversion. Moreover, two men, the Abbé Cotin and the poet Ménage, had been inveighing against Molière's plays. Here was a chance to prick them. So on March 11, 1672, he offered Les Femmes Savantes. Philomène discharges a maid for using a word condemned by the Academy. Her daughter Armande rejects matrimony as a disgusting contact of bodies rather than a fusion of minds. Trissotin reads his awful poetry to these admiring prudes. Badius riddles the poetry and presents more of his own and the same. Against all these, Molière defends Henriette, who abominates Alexandrines and wants a husband who can give her children instead of epigrams. Had Armande Béjart become a précieuse, or was Molière showing his age? 7. Curtain. He was only 50, but his hectic life, his tuberculosis, his marriage, and his bereavements had drained his vitality. The portrait by Mignard caught him at his prime. Large nose, sensual lips, and comically elevated eyebrows, but already a wrinkled forehead and wistful eyes. Moving in the vortex of the theatre from town to town and from day to day, dealing with high-strung prima donnas, a lively wife and a sensitive king, seeing 2 of his 3 children die, this was no primrose path to optimism, but an open road to bad digestion and early death. Understandably, he became a self-devouring volcano, melancholy, sharp-tempered, frankly critical, but sympathetically generous. His troupe understood him and was devoted to him, knowing that he used himself up to give it sustenance and success. His friends were always ready to do battle for him, above all Boileau and La Fontaine, who, sometimes with Racine, made with Molière Les Quatre Amis, the famous 4 friends. They found him well-educated and informed, witty but seldom merry, a Grimaldi on the stage, but in private sadder than Shakespeare's Jaques. After 4.5 years of separation, he returned to his wife in 1671. The child that resulted from this reconciliation died after a month of life. At Auteuil, he had lived on a milk diet prescribed by his doctor. Now he resumed his usual consumption of wine and attended late suppers to please Armande. Despite his increasing cough, he decided to play the leading role, Argan, in his final play, La Malade Imaginaire. This on February 10, 1673. Argan imagines himself inflicted with a dozen diseases and spends half of his fortune on doctors and drugs. His brother Bérald derides him. Argan: What must we do then when we are sick? Bérald: Nothing, brother. We must only keep ourselves quiet. Nature herself, when we let her alone, will gently deliver herself from the disorder she's fallen into. 'Tis our ingratitude, 'tis our impatience that spoils all, and almost all men die of their medicines, not of their diseases. To further ridicule the profession, Argan is told that he himself can become a doctor in short order and can easily pass the examination for a medical license. There follows the famous mock examination. First Doctor: Demandabo causam and rationem quare opium faci dormire. Argan: Quia est in eo virtus dormitiva, cujus est natura sensus stupefire. Second Doctor: Quae sunt remedia, quae in maladia, called hydropsia, convenit facere. Argan: Clisterium donare, postea bledare, afterwards purgare. Chorus: Bene, bene, bene respondere, dignus, dignus est intrare, in nostro docto corpore. Molière's death was almost a part of this play. On February 17, 1673, Armande and others, perceiving his fatigue, begged him to close the theatre for a few days while he regained strength. "But how can I do that?" he asked. "There are 50 poor workmen here who are paid by the day. What will they do if we don't play? I should reproach myself for having neglected to give them their bread for a single day so long as I was able to act. In the final act, as Molière in the part of Argan, who had twice pretended death, uttered the word "Juro, I swear," in taking the oath as a physician, he was seized with a convulsive cough. He covered it with a false laugh and finished the play. He was hurried to his home by his wife and the young actor Michel Baron. He asked for a priest, but none came. His cough became more violent. He burst a blood vessel, choked with the blood in his throat, and died. Arlay de Champvaillant, Archbishop of Paris, ruled that since Molière had not made his final penitence and received absolution, he could not be buried in Christian ground. Armande, who had always loved him even while deceiving him, went to Versailles, threw herself at the feet of the king, and said, not wisely but boldly and truly, "If my husband was a criminal, his crimes were sanctioned by your majesty in person." Louis sent some secret word to the archbishop. Arlay compromised. The body must not be taken into a church for Christian rites, but it was allowed a quiet burial, after sunset, in a remote corner of the cemetery of Saint-Joseph, in the Rue Montmartre. Molière remains by common consent one of the greatest figures in the literature of France, not by perfection of dramatic technique, nor by any splendor of poetry. Almost all his plots are borrowed, almost all their denouements are artificial and absurd, almost all his characters are personified qualities. Several, like Harpagon, are exaggerated to the point of caricature. And, too, often his comedies fall into farce. We are told that the court, as well as the general public, liked him best when he was most farcical, and did not relish his mordant satires on failings widely shared. Probably he would have omitted the farce if he had not felt compelled to keep his company solvent. Like Shakespeare, mourning that he must make himself a motley to the view, he wrote, "I think it a very grievous punishment in the liberal arts to display oneself to fools, and to expose our compositions to the barbarous judgment of the stupid." It irked him to be always required to make people laugh. This, he has one of his characters say, is a queer enterprise. He aspired to write tragedies, and though he fell short of his aim, he managed to give to his greatest comedies a tragic significance and depth. So it is the philosophy in his plays, as well as their humor and pungent satire, that makes almost every literate Frenchman read Molière. It was essentially a rationalist philosophy which gladdened the hearts of the 18th century philosophe. There is in Molière not a trace of supernatural Christianity, and the religion expounded by his mouthpiece Cléante in Tartuffe might be endorsed by Voltaire. He never attacked the Christian creed. He acknowledged the beneficence of religion in innumerable lives. He respected sincere devotion, but he scorned the surface piety that put a weekly face on daily selfishness. His moral philosophy was pagan in the sense that it legitimized pleasure and had no sense of sin. It savored of Epicurus and Seneca rather than of St. Paul or Augustine, harmonized better with the laxity of the king than with the austerities of Port Royal. He deprecated excess even in virtue. He admired l'honnête homme, the sensible man of the world who threaded his way with sane moderation among competing absurdities and adjusted himself without fuss to the shortcomings of mankind. Molière himself did not reach that plane of moderation. His profession as a comic dramatist compelled him to satire and often to hyperbole. He was too hard on learned women, too indiscriminate in attacking physicians, and he might have shown more respect for enemies. But overemphasis is the blood of satire, and dramas seldom make their point without it. Molière would have been greater if he could have found a way to satirize the fundamental evil of the reign, the military greed and ruinous despotism of Louis XIV. But it was this gracious autocrat who protected him against his enemies and made possible his war against bigotry. How lucky he was to die before his master had become the most destructive bigot of them all. France loves Molière and still plays him, as England loves and plays Shakespeare. We cannot, as some fervent Gauls would do, equate him with England's bard. He was only a part of Shakespeare, whose other parts were Racine and Montaigne. Nor can we, as many do, place him at the head of French literature. We are not even sure that Boileau was right when he told Louis XIV that Molière was the greatest poet of the reign. When Boileau said this, Racine had not yet written Phèdre or Athalie. But in Molière it is not only the writer who belongs to the history of France, it is the man, the harassed and faithful manager, the deceived and forgiving husband, the dramatist covering his griefs with laughter, the ailing actor carrying on to the hour of death his war against pedantry, bigotry, superstition, and sham.